To my fiancé and his entire family. I was nothing more than an ordinary warehouse worker. Then one single live television broadcast exposed the massive financial empire I had secretly built for years, and suddenly the extravagant wedding they carefully planned began to unravel right before their greedy eyes. My name is Simone. I am 29 years old. I sat at a mahogany table inside Le Petit Chateau, Atlanta's most exclusive French restaurant. I wore a simple beige dress that cost $50. Across from me sat my fiancé, Julian Sterling, a 32-year-old wealth manager who wore custom-tailored Italian suits to hide his deep insecurities. Next to him was his mother, Brenda, whose entire existence revolved around projecting absolute perfection. Beside her was Chloe, Julian's 28-year-old sister, who ran up credit card debt while pretending to be an influencer. We were supposed to be having our wedding tasting dinner. Instead, it was an exercise in endurance. Brenda flagged down the waiter with a dismissive snap of her manicured fingers. She snatched the checkbook from his tray before he could set it down. She scoffed loudly and tossed the receipt across the table. It landed on my lap. I glanced down. The bill was for $4,500. They had ordered vintage champagne, imported truffles, and the most expensive steaks. Brenda took a deliberate sip of her water, her eyes locked on mine with disdain. You scan barcodes at a shipping warehouse for $15 an hour. Right? Simone, Brenda asked, intentionally raising her voice to carry to adjacent tables. I think it is time you pay your share. Julian is the future of Sterling Capital. He cannot carry dead weight into our family. I will not subsidize a working-class girl who brings no pedigree, no assets, and no value here. Before I could process the cruelty of her statement, Chloe leaned across the table recording a video for her followers. Her hand conveniently knocked against her crystal wine glass. A heavy wave of burgundy wine splashed violently across the front of my beige dress. The cold liquid soaked instantly through the fabric, staining it a deep purple. I gasped and forcefully pushed my chair back. Oops, Chloe said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Zara fabric really does not wash well, does it? Does it, see, Julian? I told you she does not fit the Sterling aesthetic. You cannot bring her to the country club gala looking like that. I looked at Julian, expecting him to defend me. We had been together for 2 whole years. But Julian did not even look up from his phone. He casually swiped right on a text message and sighed heavily. Simone, please stop causing a scene in front of my mother, Julian muttered, sounding annoyed. Chloe said it was an accident. Just dab it with water and handle the bill like my mother asked. I need to maintain my personal liquidity for the wedding deposits next week. Our aesthetic as a power couple requires major investments right now. I pressed the napkin against my ruined dress, my heart hammering in angry rhythm. I was not angry about the dress. I was angry at the ridiculous illusion they forced me to participate in. Julian did not have any real liquidity. I knew that for a legal fact. But I played my part as the submissive fiancé. I do not have $4,500 in my checking account right now, Julian, I said softly, keeping my head down. Julian rolled his eyes and snatched the folder back. He pulled a shiny platinum credit card from his designer wallet and slapped it onto the waiter's tray with a loud smack. Take care of this, he ordered, projecting the flawless image of a wealthy patriarch. The waiter nodded politely and walked away toward the register. 3 minutes later, the waiter returned. His expression was apologetic but firm. He leaned down and whispered discreetly to Julian. Sir, I am sorry, but this card has been declined. Julian's face turned ashen. The confident smirk vanished instantly. He grabbed the card from the tray. Run it again. Your machine must be broken or experiencing a network error. The waiter stood his ground, his voice calm. I ran it 3 times, sir. The system clearly says insufficient funds. Please provide another payment method. Chloe stopped recording her meal, lowering her phone. Brenda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, nervously adjusting her pearl necklace and glaring at the waiter. Julian was sweating now. The elite image of black excellence he desperately wanted to project was crumbling in front of the entire VIP dining area. He leaned toward me, his face close to mine, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Use your emergency savings, Simone. I know you have that little account you put your warehouse paychecks into. Pay this bill right now or you are going to embarrass my family. I looked at the man I was supposed to soon marry. Here was a man willing to drain his future wife's meager emergency funds to save face at a restaurant he could not afford. A man who let his mother humiliate me and his sister ruin my clothes without saying a word. I reached into my cheap purse and pulled out my phone. Tucked inside the scratched case was a sleek black metal card. It had no identifying numbers on the front, only my name laser engraved. It was an exclusive corporate card, tied to an account holding over $20 million in liquid cash. Cash belonging to Lumina. Pay the financial technology startup I secretly founded and grew into a juggernaut while working my fake warehouse job. I kept my hand hovering low over the table, hiding the heavy metal card from their view, and tapped it against the wireless payment machine the waiter was holding. The machine immediately emitted a sharp, cheerful beep. Approved. The waiter printed the receipt, handed it to me with a nod, and walked away. I slipped the black card back behind my phone case before anyone at the table could register what had happened. Julian let out a massive sigh of relief, immediately fixing his posture, smoothing his tie, and shooting a condescending look at the retreating waiter. "See, I told you. It was just a stupid bank error." Julian lied smoothly to his mother and sister, his arrogance returning in full force. "My fiancé just authorized the transfer from my secondary offshore accounts. Everything is fine." Brenda cleared her throat loudly, eager to move past the temporary financial embarrassment and reassert her dominance over the table. She reached down into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick stapled stack of legal papers. She slammed the 50-page document onto the center of the wine-stained table, dropping it over my ruined dessert plate. "Good," Brenda said coldly, her eyes narrowing. "Since we are already handling business, we might as well handle the most important transaction of this entire wedding. Now sign this." I stared down at the thick stack of legal paper, noting the logo of a prominent law firm at the top. "What is this?" I asked, maintaining my quiet, submissive tone. "It is an ironclad prenuptial agreement," Brenda stated, crossing her arms. "We had Julian's lawyers draft it this morning. You are marrying into a legacy, Simone. You are marrying into generations of hard work and elite status. We have to protect Julian's assets and future earnings from people who do not understand wealth management. No signature, no wedding." Julian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an expensive gold fountain pen, sliding it across the table. "My mother is right, Simone," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "You have to understand that as a wealth manager, I have significant liabilities and assets to balance. This document ensures that if things go south, you walk away with exactly what you brought into this relationship. Which is nothing. It is standard procedure." Chloe snickered, picking up her phone again. "Just sign the paper, Simone. It is not like you have millions of dollars to protect. You should be grateful my brother is even giving you his last name." I looked at the pen, the document, and finally at the three people sitting across from me. They were convinced of their own superiority. They believed they were trapping a desperate poor woman who would accept any abuse to marry into their prestigious family. They had no idea who I really was. They had no idea I was a stealth CEO. By forcing me to sign this ridiculous contract, they were handing me the keys to their complete destruction. I picked up the gold pen, feeling its weight in my hand. I looked Julian straight in his arrogant eyes, allowing a small, cold, calculated smile to touch my lips. I opened the heavy document and read the first page. The dense legal jargon was designed to confuse someone without a financial background. Unfortunately for Julian, reading complex contracts was how I spent my average Tuesday morning. I flipped through the thick pages, scanning specific clauses. The sheer audacity of the stipulations was breathtaking. The agreement explicitly stated that in the event of a divorce, I would walk away with zero assets. I would be required to waive all rights to spousal support. But the absolute worst part was buried on page 34. According to this document, I would automatically assume 50% of Julian's existing personal debts upon signing our marriage certificate. Julian leaned back in his chair, swirling his expensive wine glass with supreme confidence. He mistook my silent reading for genuine confusion. "This is how elite Black families protect their legacies," Simone Julian stated smoothly. "We have a prestigious pedigree to uphold. We have a strict standard to maintain in this city. You have to look at this from a wealth management perspective." My assets are tied to my firm, and any future acquisitions need to remain insulated. It is nothing personal against you. It is just good business. Good business, I repeated softly, playing the wounded fiancé perfectly. Julian, this document says I would be legally responsible for half of your debts. How is that fair? Brenda let out a sharp, mocking laugh. It is entirely fair, she interjected with a cruel smile. You are marrying up Simone. You are stepping into a world you could never access on your own. Taking on a share of his liabilities is the incredibly small price you pay for the privilege of carrying the Sterling name. I kept my expression carefully controlled, though my blood boiled at their massive arrogance. I set the gold pen down on the table right next to the predatory prenup. Julian, we are supposed to be building a solid life together, I said, making my voice tremble slightly to sell the performance. I have always contributed my fair share. I put everything I had into our joint house fund so we could afford the down payment on the estate you desperately wanted. Julian scoffed loudly, adjusting his tailored cuffs. Your little warehouse contributions are a tiny drop in the bucket compared to what I provide for us. I am talking about the $80,000, Julian, I replied firmly. I worked double shifts for years to save that money. I transferred it to our joint account last month. To prove my point, I reached for my phone again. I decided to pull up the joint banking app right there at the dinner table. I opened the application, typed in my secure passcode, and waited for the dashboard to load on the screen. I stared at the bright digital display. A cold, hard knot formed tightly in my stomach. The account balance, which should have read $80,000, was entirely gone. The green numbers on my screen boldly displayed a remaining balance of exactly $42.15. I blinked, staring at the screen to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. The $80,000 I had carefully transferred from my secondary corporate accounts, posing as my entire life savings, had vanished into thin air. I quickly clicked on the transaction history tab. There were two massive outgoing wire transfers initiated by Julian just 3 days ago. Julian, I said, looking up from my phone. My voice was dangerously quiet now. Where is the $80,000? Julian did not even have the common decency to look ashamed. He casually took another bite of his expensive steak, chewed slowly, and swallowed before addressing my question. I reallocated those funds, Simone, he said effortlessly, as if he were discussing the weather. We had a slight change of plans. You reallocated my entire life savings, I asked, leaning forward over the table. Yes, Julian replied sharply. Chloe had a massive brand deal coming up, and she needed a specific Cartier watch to boost her influencer image. You know how important optics are in her competitive industry. It is a necessary investment in the overall Sterling family brand. Chloe held up her left wrist proudly, displaying a heavy diamond-encrusted Cartier watch that sparkled brilliantly under the restaurant chandelier. I had to look the part, Simone, Chloe chimed in, grinning maliciously. You would not understand because you do not care about aesthetics. Julian is just looking out for his little sister. I stared at Chloe's wrist and then looked straight back at Julian. And the rest of the money, I asked. A Cartier watch does not cost $80,000. Julian sighed, clearly irritated that he had to continually explain his brilliant financial moves to me. I paid off the remaining lease on my Porsche. The high monthly payments were negatively affecting my debt-to-income ratio before the wedding. You stole the money I gave you for our house to buy your sister luxury jewelry and pay off your sports car, I stated. I made sure the people at the next table could hear the deep tremor of betrayal in my voice. I did not steal anything. Julian snapped, his eyes flashing with sudden defensive anger. It is a joint account. That means the capital legally belongs to both of us. You are marrying a Sterling. My family image is your direct responsibility now. You should be eternally grateful considering you are nothing but a college dropout. There it was, the ultimate insult they always kept fully loaded in the chamber. 5 years ago, I had intentionally dropped out of my prestigious Master of Business Administration program. My family and Julian thought I failed out because I could not handle the intense academic pressure. The reality was that I dropped out because my financial technology startup, Lumina Pay, had just secured its first major round of venture capital funding. I left school because I had to move to Silicon Valley for 6 months to actively build my empire. I had been hiding my multi-million-dollar success behind the bland facade of a warehouse worker ever since. Julian's words confirmed everything I truly needed to know. He did not love me. He viewed me as a highly disposable financial asset he could drain to fund his fake millionaire lifestyle. Brenda nodded in vigorous agreement. Julian is absolutely right. You dropped out of school and settled for a completely mediocre life. We are actively elevating you. Now stop whining about a few $1,000s, pick up that gold pen and sign the agreement. I looked at the three of them closely. They were a trio of financial parasites dressed in expensive designer clothing. They wanted to strip me of everything I had while permanently chaining me to Julian's massive hidden liabilities. Chloe, sensing a prime opportunity for viral content, whipped out her phone again. She quickly adjusted the bright lighting ring attached to her phone case and started a live stream to her 50,000 eager followers. She pointed the camera directly at my face to capture my seemingly devastated expression. "Hey guys," Chloe said to her phone, projecting a bubbly, mean-spirited energy meant to entertain her audience. "Just sitting here at Le Petit Chateau for my brother wedding tasting. We are trying to explain basic wealth management to his fiancé, but she is having a total meltdown over signing a standard prenup. You cannot take the warehouse out of the girl. Say hi, Simone. Show everyone your cheap little tears." I did not shed a single tear. I did not yell. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the table next to the golden pen. I stared directly into Chloe's camera lens, my face a mask of absolute unbothered calm. I knew exactly what was about to happen next. The restaurant VIP section featured a massive high-definition television screen mounted directly above the private bar. It was currently muted and playing a continuous loop of national financial news. The ambient noise of the busy restaurant, clinking silverware, soft jazz music, and hushed conversations was abruptly interrupted. A sharp electronic chime echoed loudly from the television speakers. The restaurant management must have turned the volume up for a major market update. A bright red breaking news alert flashed aggressively across the massive screen. It instantly caught the attention of every wealthy patron in the dining room. I watched Chloe's face drop in real time as the bright, unavoidable reflection of the massive television screen suddenly caught her eye. She slowly turned her entire body around her phone, still broadcasting live to her audience. Brenda and Julian immediately followed her gaze, turning their heads toward the busy bar area in complete silence. The anchor on the Bloomberg financial broadcast looked directly into the camera. She was about to deliver the news that would completely obliterate the Sterling family fake empire. The anchor voice cut through the upscale dining room with professional authority. In our top story tonight, the financial technology sector witnessed its most significant disruption of the quarter. Aura Tech, the revolutionary payment platform dominating the market, has officially closed its latest funding round with a staggering valuation of $300 million. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly over my ruined dress. I did not blink. I kept my eyes fixed on the television screen mounted above the bar. For years, the founder of Auratech has remained entirely out of the public eye. The anchor continued choosing to operate in complete stealth mode. But today, the elusive chief executive officer has finally decided to step into the light. Wall Street is already calling her the new face of financial innovation. The screen transitioned to a photograph taken 2 weeks ago at a private venture capital summit. I was standing confidently at the head of a boardroom table surrounded by powerful Wall Street executives. I wore a tailored navy blue power suit, my posture radiating authority. Below my image stood Simone Caldwell, founder and chief executive officer, Auratech. The silence was absolute. Chloe was the first to react. Her fingers went slack. The expensive smartphone slipped from her grasp and crashed onto the hardwood floor, the screen shattering loudly on impact. Chloe's jaw hung open so wide it looked painful. She stared at the screen, then at me, unable to process the reality standing right in front of her. Brenda's reaction was even more dramatic. She had been lifting a fork to her mouth. When my face flashed across the broadcast, the fork slipped from her manicured fingers and clattered. She froze exactly like a statue. The condescending sneer she wore all evening melted away, instantly replaced by a look of unadulterated shock. Julian's reaction was the most satisfying. He had just taken a large sip of his expensive sparkling water. When he heard my name associated with a $300 million valuation, he choked. He coughed and sputtered, his face turning a deep shade of red. He slammed his heavy glass down. He stared at me with a mixture of raw panic and sudden overwhelming greed. For a full 60 seconds, nobody at our table moved. The rest of the busy restaurant continued their dinners, but in our corner, the power dynamic had completely inverted. The poor warehouse worker they spent the evening mocking, degrading, and trying to trap in a predatory contract was suddenly revealed as a corporate titan holding more wealth than their entire family lineage combined. I slowly reached down, picked up my napkin, and casually dabbed my mouth. I looked at each of them, maintaining my calm demeanor. I let the heavy silence punish them. Then the hypocritical pivot began. It was a masterclass in manipulation and fake affection. Brenda was the first to recover. The transition was so seamless it was terrifying to witness. The woman who just 5 minutes ago told me I was dead weight suddenly sprang up from her chair. She rushed around the table and threw her arms around my shoulders, hugging me completely, ignoring the fact that my dress was soaked in deep red wine. "Oh Lord," Brenda exclaimed loudly, her voice practically dripping with artificial sweetness. "I knew it. My brilliant, beautiful daughter-in-law. I always told Julian you were destined for greatness. This is pure black excellence, Simone. You are an absolute inspiration to our community. I am so incredibly proud of you." She squeezed me harder, pressing her cheek against mine. I remained completely rigid. I did not hug her back. I simply let her perform her fake affection for the surrounding tables. Julian finally caught his breath and wiped the spilled water from his custom suit. His eyes darted nervously from the television screen to the thick stack of legal papers sitting on the table. The prenuptial agreement he had arrogantly demanded I sign was now a massive liability. If I signed that document now, I would protect my $300 million empire, and he would have absolutely no legal claim to my vast fortune. His greed overrode his embarrassment instantly. Julian lunged forward across the table. He frantically snatched the 50-page document out from under my dessert plate. His hands were shaking as he gripped the paper. "You are a queen, Simone," Julian said, his voice breathless. He gripped the top of the pages and violently ripped the entire document in half. The sound of tearing paper echoed sharply over our table. He ripped the pages again and shoved the shredded pieces into his jacket pocket. "We do not need this insulting paper. We are building a legacy together. What is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. I trust you completely, baby." I looked at the torn pieces of paper sticking out of his pocket. Just 10 minutes ago, signing that document was a mandatory condition of our marriage. Now he was physically destroying it to ensure he could access my corporate assets. Chloe finally found her voice. She bent down, picked up her shattered phone, and looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Simone," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I am so sorry about your dress. It really was an accident. I will buy you 10 new ones. You look so amazing on television. We should totally do a collaborative photo shoot together for my brand. I can introduce you to my followers as my billionaire sister-in-law." I did not yell. I did not scream at them for their disgusting behavior. Reacting with emotional outbursts would only give them ammunition to call me an angry, unstable woman. I needed them to feel completely safe. I needed them to believe that their sudden change of heart had successfully manipulated me. I needed to feed their massive, insatiable greed so they would willingly walk straight into the trap I was building for them now. I looked at Brenda and then at Julian, who was looking at me like a starving man staring at a feast. I allowed a slow, chilling, calculated smile to spread across my face. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth. "You know what, Brenda," I said, making my voice sound sweet and accommodating. "You are absolutely right. We are representing Black excellence, and our wedding needs to reflect that standard perfectly. I think we should expand our budget. I want you to plan $1 million wedding. Spare absolutely no expense. Let us show this city what we can do when we join our empires together." Brenda gasped with genuine delight, her eyes sparkling with greed. "Oh, Simone, it will be the social event of the decade. I will call the wedding planner first thing in the morning. We will upgrade the venue, the catering, the flowers. Everything will be absolutely top tier. Julian reached across the table and grabbed my hand, squeezing it affectionately. I love you so much, Simone. We are going to take over the city together. I smiled back at him, pulling my hand away gently under the guise of reaching for my purse. I love you too, Julian, I lied smoothly. We are going to have an unforgettable wedding. I reached into my cheap purse and pulled out my phone. I kept it under the table. I opened my encrypted messaging application and found the chat thread with Zoe, my best friend, and my ruthless corporate attorney. Zoe already knew everything about my company and everything about Julian's fake lifestyle. She was waiting for my secret signal. I quickly typed out a secure message using only my thumb. They took the bait. They saw the broadcast and completely changed their tune. Julian ripped up the prenup himself. Prepare the financial snare. Start digging deep into Julian firm and pull every single record on his personal debt. It is time to lock the gates now. I hit send and slipped the phone back into my purse. I looked back up at the Sterling family. They were already eagerly discussing which luxury magazines they should contact to cover our high society wedding. They were planning how to spend my money. They were visualizing their elevated social status. They had no idea that they had just enthusiastically volunteered to fund their own total destruction. The real game was just beginning, and I was going to strip them of everything they valued. Every dollar, every ounce of social standing, and every shred of their fake dignity. I slowly picked up my water glass and took a slow sip, watching them blindly celebrate their absolute and impending ruin tonight. Let them plan their $1 million wedding. Let them invite all their elite friends and powerful colleagues. Let them build the biggest stage possible. Because when the right time came, I was going to use that exact same stage to burn the Sterling family legacy straight to the ground completely. On Monday morning, I walked into the lavish offices of Sterling Capital. Zoe walked closely behind me, clutching a cheap binder and wearing an oversized cardigan that hid her predatory posture. She adjusted her fake prescription glasses and bit her lip, playing the role of my timid paralegal to absolute perfection. Julian's corner office was a grotesque monument to his ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the Atlanta skyline. Exotic mahogany bookshelves lined the walls filled with thick financial volumes I knew he had never opened. Julian sat behind a massive glass desk, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than a starting teacher's salary. He genuinely believed he possessed a superior intellect simply because he wore expensive suits. His entire career was built on exploiting the trust of hardworking people within our community, using their hard-earned wealth to fund his personal delusions of grandeur. When we walked in, he stood up and flashed a brilliant smile, completely oblivious to the fact that two apex predators had just strolled straight into his pristine cage. "Come in, baby," Julian said smoothly, walking around his desk to kiss my cheek. "And you must be the paralegal. Welcome. Please have a seat. Let us get this minor paperwork finalized so we can focus on the wedding." Zoe intentionally dropped a few loose papers onto the plush carpet before frantically scrambling to pick them up. Julian watched her with a visible smirk of absolute condescension. He clearly believed he was dealing with an amateur. He had no idea Zoe had personally dismantled major companies in federal court. Julian leaned against the edge of his glass desk. He looked down at me with a comforting, masculine expression. "Simone, I know these legal documents can seem intimidating when you do not have a background in advanced wealth management." Julian began, his voice dripping with patronizing arrogance. "This asset consolidation agreement is incredibly simple. It merges our portfolios under one unified umbrella. It allows me to legally handle the complex market logistics, tax burdens, and aggressive investment strategies. You just sit back, look beautiful, and be the inspirational face of your company. I will handle the heavy lifting." Zoe cleared her throat nervously. "Mr. Sterling," she squeaked, her voice high and unsteady, "I was just reading over Section 4, Paragraph 2. It says the signatory pledges their corporate equity as general collateral. Does that mean you can use her company shares to pay off your own personal debts?" Julian let out a dismissive chuckle. He looked at Zoe like she was a slow child. "No, sweetheart, that is absolutely not what that means. Julian lied smoothly, looking directly at Zoe's hidden recording device disguised as a pen. That is standard corporate protection language. It means our assets protect each other mutually. I would never use Simone's personal equity to satisfy outside liabilities. This document explicitly limits my executive control to the specific corporate entity she signs under. Her personal wealth is completely protected. That is a legal guarantee. Zoe nodded vigorously, pretending to be deeply relieved. Oh, I understand now. Thank you so much for explaining that to me, Mr. Sterling. You are incredibly smart with these things. Julian beamed with massive pride, his ego stroked to perfection. He turned back to me, sliding the contract across the desk. See, baby, even your paralegal gets it now. It is just a routine formality to protect our Black excellence legacy. I looked down at the document. Julian had already signed his name at the bottom of the final page. He was eagerly handing over his financial life, fully believing he was trapping me. He thought he was outsmarting a naive woman. He did not realize he was legally binding himself to a ghost. I picked up the expensive gold pen. I looked up at Julian, forcing my eyes to convey complete trust and adoration. I am so lucky to have a strong man like you to protect my assets, Julian, I said softly. I lowered my head and pressed the pen to the signature line. I did not write Simone Caldwell. I did not sign my personal name. Instead, using a highly stylized script, I signed on behalf of Lumina Holdings Limited Liability Company. It was the shadow corporation Zoe and I specifically created to absorb toxic debt. The heavy gold pen glided smoothly across the expensive paper. I made sure every single loop of the signature was completely illegible, perfectly obscuring the corporate trap I had just laid. Julian was so desperate to secure his financial lifeline that he never even bothered to request a secondary legal review of the final executed document. I pushed the signed document back across the desk. Julian eagerly snatched it up. He was so incredibly blinded by the imaginary prospect of accessing $300 million that he did not even glance at the actual signature. He simply saw ink on the line and smiled like a man who had just won the largest lottery in human history. Perfect, Julian said, carefully sliding the contract into a secure leather folder. I will have my team file this immediately. You just made the best financial decision of your entire life, Simone. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my designer dress. I know I did, Julian. I really know I did. Zoe and I walked out of the Sterling Capitol building in complete silence. We maintained our respective roles until we were safely inside my heavily tinted chauffeured vehicle. The second the heavy car doors closed, blocking us from the outside world, Zoe ripped off her fake glasses and let out a sharp, victorious laugh. We got him, Zoe said, pulling the recording pen from her pocket and plugging it directly into her laptop. We have him on tape actively misrepresenting a binding financial contract, and we have his signature locking his assets to your shadow company. Now let us go buy some debt. We had very successfully navigated the first major hurdle of our strategic operation. The sheer audacity of Julian's arrogance had blinded him to the most basic legal safeguards. He was so accustomed to dealing with compliant, trusting women who worshipped his superficial success that the concept of a counterattack never even entered his mind. He was playing checkers while we were actively maneuvering pieces on a multidimensional chessboard. I leaned my head against the soft leather seat of the vehicle, letting out a long, slow breath I felt like I had been holding for hours. The initial anxiety I had felt upon entering his office was completely gone now. It was now entirely replaced by a cold, calculating determination. I was going to systematically dismantle his entire life piece by piece, until there was absolutely nothing left but the devastating truth of his own failures. That very same night, my penthouse apartment was transformed into a highly secure financial war room. Zoe and a hand-picked team of elite forensic accountants sat around my dining table tracking the massive digital footprints Julian had clumsily left behind. The deeper they dug into his wealth management firm, the more rotten the entire foundation appeared. The sheer volume of his financial negligence was staggering. He had illegally commingled client funds, falsified quarterly return statements, and completely drained several prominent trust accounts. He was operating a massive, highly illegal Ponzi scheme hidden right in the heart of Atlanta financial district. Julian had systematically defrauded at least a dozen of his most prominent black clients. He had funneled their retirement funds into high-risk ventures to cover his own luxurious lifestyle. But his most fatal mistake was the $2.5 million he had borrowed from the underground syndicate. "We found the primary holding company for the syndicate," Zoe announced, tapping her laptop screen. "They operate under a legitimate private equity front called Apex Capital Solutions. They are incredibly ruthless. They have a strict policy of seizing physical assets when debtors default, and Julian is officially defaulting on Friday." I walked over to the table and looked at the glowing screen. "Contact their principal broker right now," I ordered calmly. "Tell them Lumina Holdings is prepared to purchase Julian Sterling's entire debt portfolio at a 10% premium, cash transaction effective immediately. They get their money tonight and I get Julian." Zoe's fingers flew across the keyboard. Within 2 hours, the complex financial transaction was completely finalized. Apex Capital Solutions eagerly accepted the highly profitable buyout. Massive wire transfers were securely routed through our encrypted banking channels. When the digital dust finally settled at 3 o'clock in the morning, the harsh reality of the situation was securely locked in a digital vault. Julian Sterling no longer owed $2.5 million to a dangerous underground syndicate. He owed $2.5 million directly to me. I was now legally his largest and most aggressive creditor. I literally owned him. The next morning, I was reviewing the final buyout contracts when my phone began to ring frantically. The caller identification displayed Julian's name. I answered the call, putting him on speakerphone for Zoe to hear. "Simone, baby, I need your help immediately," Julian said. His voice was incredibly tight, bordering on absolute panic. He was speaking rapidly, his usual smooth composure completely shattered. "What is wrong, Julian?" I asked, feigning deep concern. "The wedding planner just called," he lied effortlessly. "We have a massive emergency with the vendors. The historic venue, the high-end caterers, and the luxury florists are all demanding their full payments up front today. It is because of the short notice. I need you to wire $500,000 to this specific account number right now. It is absolutely urgent, or we lose the entire wedding." I looked across the room at Zoe. She was already typing the routing number Julian had hastily texted to my phone into her secure tracking software. "I will take care of it right away, baby," I promised sweetly. "Do not worry about a single thing." I ended the call and watched Zoe screen intently. A dark, terrifying truth slowly materialized on the glowing monitor. Julian was not asking for vendor money. The routing number he provided did not belong to a wedding planner, a florist, or a historic estate. This was not a simple dispute. This was a highly calculated, malicious attempt to drain my startup capital before our wedding day even arrived. The sheer, unadulterated gall of this man was almost breathtaking to witness in real time. He was fully and completely prepared to look me straight in the eye, call me his beloved baby, and actively participate in the total financial ruination of my company. He did not care about our future, our wedding, or our shared legacy. He only cared about saving himself from the dangerous syndicate he had foolishly entangled himself with. He was more than willing to completely sacrifice me on the altar of his own massive, insurmountable greed. I took a long, deep, steadying breath and looked directly at Zoe. The final puzzle piece had just snapped perfectly into place. Julian had officially crossed the point of no return. We were no longer just defending my assets. We were actively preparing for his total annihilation. "Simone," Zoe said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "That routing number leads directly to a highly secure, untraceable offshore banking account located in the Cayman Islands. He is trying to steal $500,000 from you today." I stared at the glowing computer monitor, my blood running completely cold before boiling over into pure, concentrated rage. Julian was not just a greedy opportunist. He was an active, malicious predator trying to drain my startup capital before I ever walked down the aisle. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I simply told Zoe to freeze the outbound wire transfer and immediately send a fake confirmation receipt directly to his mobile phone. Let him firmly believe he had successfully secured his offshore nest egg in the Cayman Islands. The higher he climbed on his massive mountain of lies, the more bones he would inevitably break when I finally pushed him off the edge. 2 days later, Brenda hosted my official bridal shower. She spared absolutely no expense utilizing the brand new credit lines she wrongfully assumed I was blindly paying for. The extravagant event was held at the highly exclusive Botanical Gardens Conservatory, located right in the heart of Atlanta. The massive glass greenhouse was completely transformed into a high society paradise. Thousands of imported white orchids cascaded from the vaulted glass ceiling. Crystal champagne towers stood at every corner catching the afternoon sunlight. Brenda invited the absolute elite of the city. Wives of powerful politicians, prominent judges, and mega-church socialites filled the room, dressed in their finest pastel attire. She paraded me around the beautiful conservatory like a newly acquired prize horse. Brenda hooked her arm tightly through mine, aggressively steering me toward a group of wealthy older women draped in heavy diamonds. "Look at her," Brenda boasted loudly, making absolutely sure her voice echoed off the glass walls for maximum attention. I completely discovered this precious diamond in the rough. When Julian first brought Simone home, she was so simple and unpolished. She had absolutely no idea how our world operated. But I took her under my wing immediately. It takes a true sterling matriarch to polish a working-class girl and elevate her to our prestigious standard. Now she is a corporate chief executive officer. I practically built her confidence and her style from scratch. I smiled politely, ruthlessly suppressing the intense urge to laugh directly in her face. Brenda was shamelessly taking credit for my entire life work. She truly believed her mere proximity to my wealth instantly elevated her own social standing. I played along perfectly, offering gracious nods and modest thank yous. I was intentionally letting her build her public pedestal as high as possible so the impending fall would destroy her reputation completely. The afternoon progressed with expensive catered food, live string music, and incredibly forced laughter. Eventually, it was time for the customary champagne toasts. Vanessa, my future sister-in-law, stepped confidently up to the microphone. She was wearing a striking emerald green dress and carrying a designer clutch. Vanessa had always deeply resented me, and she clearly wanted to assert her dominance in front of this elite crowd. Vanessa tapped her crystal glass and smiled sweetly, her eyes locked onto mine with undeniable malice. To Simone, Vanessa began, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive venom. "We are all just so incredibly amazed by your sudden financial success. It truly shows that anyone, even someone from a low-income neighborhood working in a dusty warehouse, can eventually get lucky. But let us be completely honest today. Wealth is one thing, but class is another entirely. It takes a sterling to truly elevate a street girl. We are so happy to welcome you and teach you how to properly behave in polite society." The entire room went completely silent. Several wealthy women exchanged highly uncomfortable glances. Brenda simply sipped her champagne, clearly enjoying the public degradation of her future daughter-in-law. Chloe smirked from her seat in the front row. They heavily expected me to lower my head in deep shame. They expected me to shrink under the crushing weight of their fabricated superiority. Instead, I stood up from my chair and walked calmly toward the microphone. I took the microphone from Vanessa's hand with a gentle, terrifying smile. "Thank you so much for those incredibly warm words, Vanessa," I said, my voice echoing clearly and powerfully across the entire conservatory. "It is truly fascinating to hear you speak so passionately about class and elevation, especially since true class usually involves a certain level of authenticity." I paused, letting my eyes slowly and deliberately sweep over her entire outfit. "For example, that emerald green dress you are wearing right now. It is a supposedly stunning piece from the Valentino Spring collection. However, the authentic piece features pure silk lining, not a cheap polyester blend. And that beautiful Hermes clutch you are holding so tightly in your hands. The genuine article has a distinct serial number embossed on the interior flap, whereas yours has a rather obvious factory misprint on the exterior clasp. It is truly remarkable how well you managed to project elite status, while proudly wearing last season cheap knockoffs from a discount website." The entire room erupted into a symphony of shocked gasps. Wealthy socialites immediately leaned in, their judgmental eyes darting directly to Vanessa's hands and her dress. Vanessa's face turned a violent, humiliating shade of purple. Her jaw dropped open and she instinctively tried to hide her fake clutch behind her back. She was entirely exposed in front of the exact high society crowd she worshipped and desperately wanted to impress. But you are absolutely right about one important thing. I continued smoothly, refusing to let her breathe or defend herself. It does take a highly specific type of person to elevate an environment. I am just so glad I can finally bring some authentic luxury and undeniable truth to the Sterling family today. Cheers. I raised my glass high in the air. A few women in the heavily invested crowd actually clapped. Vanessa burst into humiliating tears and practically ran out of the conservatory, completely destroyed by my pure grace and factual accuracy. Brenda glared at me, her eyes burning with absolute fury, but she could not dare cause a scene in front of the mayor wife and the church elders. Before Brenda could attempt to regain any control of her ruined bridal shower, the heavy glass doors of the conservatory swung open violently. A large, stern-looking man in a cheap gray suit marched directly into the elegant room. He stuck out like a sore thumb among the sea of designer gowns and expensive floral arrangements. He held a thick manila envelope tightly in his right hand. "Excuse me," the man announced loudly, his gruff voice cutting right through the soft string quartet music. "I am looking for Julian Sterling, or an official representative of the Sterling family immediately." Brenda instantly rushed forward, her face flushed with sudden panic. She desperately tried to physically block the man from entering further into the room. "Who are you? How did you get in here? This is a highly exclusive private event. Security! Someone call security right now!" Brenda shrieked, trying to cause a massive scene to throw him out before he could speak another word to the crowd. "I am a professional process server, lady," the man said bluntly, completely unfazed by her hysterical screaming. "I have highly urgent legal documents regarding a severely defaulted luxury auto loan. The bank is officially repossessing Julian Sterling Porsche today. The vehicle has been flagged by authorities and I need to serve these papers immediately to a family representative." The prominent socialites in the room began whispering furiously to one another. The carefully constructed facade of black excellence and massive wealth was cracking wide open for the second time that afternoon. Brenda looked like she was about to faint from the sheer embarrassment of having a repo man crash her elite party. I smoothly stepped around Brenda and approached the process server. I maintained my absolute composure, acting exactly like a protective, responsible fiancé, handling a minor misunderstanding. "I am his fiancé," I said calmly, projecting total control. "I will gladly accept the legal documents on his behalf today." The process server looked incredibly relieved to deal with a rational person. He handed me the thick manila envelope and a standard clipboard. "Sign right here to confirm receipt," he instructed. I signed the clipboard without hesitation. Then I reached into my designer purse and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills. I had brought cash specifically to tip the event staff, but this was a much better investment. I handed the man $500 in crisp cash. "Thank you for your extreme professionalism today," I said loudly enough for the entire room to hear clearly. "Please take this for your trouble. The Sterling family always pays its debts eventually." The process server tipped his head respectfully, pocketed the cash, and walked quickly out of the conservatory. Brenda stood frozen, absolutely mortified by the public spectacle. I held the heavy manila envelope securely in my hands. The room was buzzing with vicious gossip. I turned my back to the crowd and slowly opened the unsealed envelope to review the specific legal documents inside. I scanned the bold print detailing Julian defaulted loan. He had not made a single payment on the luxury sports car in over 6 months. But as I read further down the page, my eyes locked onto a highly specific legal detail that made my heart stop entirely. The blood rushed forcefully to my ears. The auto loan for the expensive Porsche was not just in Julian's name alone. The legal documents clearly showed a secondary signature on the financial agreement. The luxury vehicle was officially co-signed by someone else. I stared at the printed name, feeling a sudden violent surge of adrenaline mixed with absolute disgust. The car was not just repossessed. It was legally co-signed by a 24-year-old woman named Maya Jenkins. She was a junior analyst working directly under Julian at his wealth management firm. Julian did not just have a terrible credit score. He had a deeply hidden secret mistress, and he was actively using her credit to fund his fake lifestyle while planning to marry me for my corporate wealth. I carefully folded the documents and slid the manila envelope into my purse. The Sterling family thought they were manipulating a naive girl. They had absolutely no idea they were actively awakening a monster today. I left the Botanical Gardens Conservatory and stepped directly into the waiting Maybach. Zoe was already sitting in the back seat tapping furiously on her encrypted laptop. I handed her the thick manila envelope containing the repossession documents. Zoe pulled out the paperwork and scanned the secondary signature line. Her eyes narrowed sharply. Maya Jenkins. Zoe read aloud, her voice pure ice. She is a 24-year-old junior analyst at Julian firm. I just pulled her employment record and credit history. She makes $60,000 a year, yet she somehow co-signed a massive loan for a luxury sports car. Julian is systematically using his young subordinate to shield his own credit rating. I leaned back against the plush leather seat and stared out the tinted window. I did not feel heartbroken. I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of clinical precision. Julian was a parasite infecting every woman he touched. We need to speak with Maya immediately, I said calmly. I want her intercepted before Julian realizes his car was officially repossessed at my bridal shower. Zoe tracked Maya's location using her corporate cellular data. We found her sitting alone inside a quiet upscale coffee shop just 2 blocks away from the Sterling Capitol building. She was typing nervously on a silver laptop, looking constantly over her shoulder. Zoe and I walked into the coffee shop. I wore my designer dress completely ruined by dark red wine, but I carried myself like a reigning monarch. I walked directly to Maya's table and sat down across from her. Zoe stood silently behind my right shoulder, projecting the intimidating aura of a ruthless corporate enforcer. Maya looked up from her screen. Her eyes widened in absolute terror. She recognized me instantly from the financial news broadcast and the framed photographs Julian kept on his desk. She braced herself, visibly anticipating a loud, violent confrontation. She expected me to scream, throw hot coffee, and cause a massive public spectacle. I did none of those things. I simply signaled the barista, ordered a black coffee, and looked at the terrified young woman with profound pity. "Hello, Maya," I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft and perfectly level. "My name is Imone Caldwell. I believe you are currently sleeping with my fiancé." Maya's face drained of all color. She opened her mouth to deny it, but her voice completely failed her. Her hands shook so violently that she had to quickly hide them under the wooden table. "I am not here to fight you over a deeply flawed man," I continued smoothly. "I am here as a chief executive officer, offering you a one-time professional courtesy." I reached into my designer purse, pulled out the repossession documents, and slid them directly across the table. "I strongly suggest you read these pages right now." Maya looked down at the official bank papers. She read the bold print stating the luxury vehicle was officially repossessed due to severe financial default. She saw her own signature listed as the primary financial guarantor. A soft, pathetic sob escaped her throat. "Julian promised me he was making all the monthly payments," Maya whispered, her eyes filling with hot, desperate tears. "He told me his assets were just temporarily frozen because of the upcoming wedding logistics." "Julian Sterling is a massive fraud," I stated factually. "He is millions of dollars in debt to highly dangerous people. He does not have a frozen trust fund. He is a sinking ship, Maya, and he deliberately tied you directly to his heavy anchor. When the bank comes to collect the remaining balance on that luxury vehicle, they are coming straight for your modest salary. He has completely ruined your financial future just to maintain his fake image." Maya broke down completely. The facade of the glamorous corporate mistress shattered into a million pieces. She was just a naive, manipulated girl who believed a charismatic older executive. "I am so incredibly sorry," Simone Maya cried, burying her face in her hands. "He told me you were just a foolish, uneducated warehouse worker. He said he was only marrying you because you were submissive and easy to control." I took a slow sip of my black coffee. "What else did he tell you, Maya? Tell me absolutely everything, and my legal team will help you untangle your credit from his fraudulent loans. Lie to me, and I will let the banks destroy your entire life." Maya wiped her eyes frantically, eager to save herself. He has a master plan, she confessed, her voice shaking with raw fear. When the financial news broke about your $300 million company, he called me in a total panic. He told me he was going to pretend to be the perfect, loving fiancé. He said he was going to trick you into signing an asset consolidation contract. He already did that, Zoe interjected coldly from behind me. What was his next step? He is planning to drain your startup funds on the actual day of the wedding, Maya revealed, looking around nervously, as if Julian might suddenly appear. He told me he set up heavily encrypted offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He plans to transfer $5 million of your corporate capital the second your marriage certificate becomes legally binding. Then he is going to leave you standing alone at the altar. He promised he would meet me at the private airport and we would fly away together using your company money. I felt a sharp, dangerous thrill run through my veins. Julian was incredibly arrogant, but he was also remarkably stupid to leave a living, breathing witness to his federal crimes. Do you have any actual proof of this completely ridiculous plan? I asked her. Maya nodded vigorously. She reached for her mobile phone with trembling fingers. Julian loves to hear himself talk. He leaves me long voice memos bragging about his brilliant financial crimes when he drinks too much expensive scotch. I saved every single one of them. She unlocked her phone and forwarded an entire folder of audio files directly to Zoe's secure server. Zoe quickly opened the files on her encrypted laptop and pressed play. Julian's arrogant, drunken voice filled our private corner of the coffee shop. I could clearly hear him laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me. I heard him explicitly detail his malicious intent to commit massive federal wire fraud using my corporate assets. It was the exact smoking gun we needed to guarantee his absolute destruction. While Zoe downloaded the audio files, she requested access to Maya firm login credentials to verify the offshore routing numbers. Maya, desperate for our legal protection, handed over her laptop without a single second of hesitation. Zoe's fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the firm basic security protocols and digging directly into Julian's private client files. Suddenly, Zoe stopped typing. She let out a sharp, genuine gasp. Simone, Zoe said, her voice dropping an entire octave. You need to look at this document right now. I stood up and walked around the table to look at the glowing screen. Zoe had uncovered a highly classified real estate folder hidden deep within Julian's encrypted drive. I stared at the digital document and my heart completely stopped beating. It was a property deed and a finalized loan agreement for a second mortgage. The property address listed on the document was my childhood home. It was the modest, beautiful house my late grandmother had worked her entire life to pay off and leave to me free and clear. It was my sacred sanctuary. Julian had secretly used his position as a wealth manager to appraise the house. He then blatantly forged my personal signature on massive financial documents to take out a second mortgage against my grandmother's property. He used my family legacy to secure a massive cash loan to cover his failing margin calls. The betrayal of my finances was one thing. I could easily replace money. But the violation of my late grandmother's legacy pushed me into a state of absolute icy calm. Julian had crossed a sacred boundary. I no longer just wanted to ruin him financially. I wanted to completely obliterate his existence from the earth. I wanted him to suffer in ways he could not even begin to comprehend. We have everything we need, I told Zoe, my voice devoid of any human emotion. Maya, if you ever speak a single word of this meeting to Julian, I will personally ensure you share his prison cell. Do you understand me? Maya nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I promise. I will never say a word. Zoe and I left the coffee shop and headed straight to my penthouse apartment. The trap was now fully constructed, armed, and ready to trigger. All I had to do was maintain the beautiful illusion for a little while longer. Later that evening, I was sitting on my plush living room sofa wearing a silk robe. The front door unlocked and Julian strolled into the apartment. He looked incredibly handsome, projecting the aura of a successful, loving patriarch. He had absolutely no idea his luxury sports car was currently sitting in an impound lot, or that his secret mistress had just handed over the blueprints to his entire criminal enterprise. Julian walked over to the couch, leaned down, and kissed me deeply on the lips. He smelled like expensive cologne and cheap lies. "Hey, baby," he whispered softly, his eyes shining with fake adoration. "I am so incredibly sorry I missed the end of your bridal shower. I was handling some massive high-level acquisitions for our future portfolio." I smiled warmly, looking up at him with perfect manufactured devotion. "It is completely fine, Julian. I know how incredibly hard you work for our family." He smiled back, clearly thrilled that I was so blindly compliant. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a small, elegant black velvet box. He sat down next to me and slowly opened the lid. Inside sat a massive, glittering diamond necklace. "I saw this today and I just had to get it for you," Julian said, his voice dropping to a smooth, romantic baritone. "To my future wife, the only woman I have ever truly loved. You deserve the entire world, Simone." I reached out and let him clasp the heavy necklace around my neck. I looked down at the glittering stones. Thanks to my extensive background in evaluating luxury assets for corporate acquisitions, my trained eyes immediately recognized the severe lack of internal flaws and the harsh, unnatural light refraction. It was not a real diamond. It was a cheap synthetic cubic zirconia stone set in standard sterling silver. He bought me a fake necklace with stolen money while actively planning to steal my multi-million-dollar company. I looked back up at Julian. I gave him the brightest, most loving smile I could possibly muster. I let my fingers trace the cold, hard weight of the fake diamond resting against my skin. It was the perfect poetic symbol of his entire fraudulent existence. "Thank you so much, Julian," I whispered sweetly, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "It is exactly what you deserve to give me. And I promise you, our wedding day is going to be something you will remember for the rest of your life." Julian beamed with massive pride, completely unaware that his absolute terrifying downfall was already entirely in motion. Let him enjoy his fake diamonds and his imaginary offshore accounts tonight. Because the Sterling family was about to learn a brutal, unforgiving lesson about what happens when you try to steal from a woman who already owns the entire bank. The weeks leading up to the wedding flew by in a blur of fake smiles and calculated silence. I handled the devastating revelation of Julian's secret mistress with the exact same clinical precision I used for hostile corporate acquisitions. Zoe and I quietly tracked down Maya Jenkins. We secured her complete cooperation, turning her into our most valuable inside informant in exchange for legally clearing her ruined credit profile. By the time the highly anticipated night of our extravagant rehearsal dinner finally arrived, my intricate financial trap was fully set and primed to snap completely shut. Brenda had rented out the entire top floor of the most exclusive private dining club in downtown Atlanta for the rehearsal dinner. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the glittering city skyline. Hundreds of thick white candles flickered elegantly on long banquet tables draped in heavy imported silk. The luxurious room was absolutely packed to maximum capacity, with Julian elite corporate colleagues, his wealthy fraternity brothers, and Brenda high society church friends. It was a spectacular and deeply sickening display of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Julian stood at the very head of the main dining table, wearing a custom-tailored velvet dinner jacket that I knew for a legal fact he absolutely could not afford. He proudly tapped his crystal champagne flute with a solid silver spoon, aggressively demanding the complete attention of the wealthy room. He smiled his signature predatory smile, wrapping his arm tightly around my waist, as if he genuinely owned me and my entire corporate fortune. To my beautiful and incredibly brilliant bride, Julian projected his voice booming confidently across the silent dining room. "And to the undeniable, unstoppable power of Black love and Black wealth. We are actively building a massive legacy tonight. A powerful financial dynasty that will completely dominate this city for generations to come. To the Sterling Empire." The affluent crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause, raising their expensive crystal glasses high into the air. I smiled warmly and nodded at the guests, playing the role of the devoted, adoring partner to absolute perfection. I raised my own glass, taking a very slow, calculated sip of vintage champagne. I knew the man holding me was an active financial criminal, but I maintained my flawless composure. As the loud applause finally began to die down, Chloe eagerly snatched the microphone directly from her brother's hand. She was wearing an incredibly flashy designer gown, clearly purchased using the fraudulent credit cards she had secretly opened in my company name just weeks prior. She confidently strutted to the center of the room, completely desperate to bask in the stolen spotlight and elevate her fake influencer status. "I just want to say a few important words about my amazing new sister-in-law," Chloe announced loudly, batting her heavy fake eyelashes at the captivated audience. "Simone and I have grown so incredibly close over these past few weeks. We are practically twins now. In fact, we are such a perfect visionary team that Simone officially appointed me as the brand new chief creative director of her tech company Auratech just yesterday afternoon." The room erupted into another round of massive, highly supportive applause. I stood perfectly still, maintaining my warm, practiced smile, though my mind was completely reeling at her absolute, unadulterated delusion. She had completely fabricated a massive corporate lie just to impress her fake social media friends and elevate her own social standing in front of the city elite. She genuinely believed that because I was marrying her brother, she automatically gained executive authority over my $300 million financial platform without doing a single day of actual work. "I am so incredibly excited to lead the creative vision for the company moving forward," Chloe continued effortlessly, completely high on her own fabricated lies. "We have some massive revolutionary projects in the pipeline, and I absolutely cannot wait to share my creative genius with the entire tech world. Thank you, Simone, for finally recognizing my true value and giving me this huge platform." I gently reached out and took the microphone back from Chloe's hand. I looked directly at her and then at Julian, who was beaming with massive, entirely unwarranted pride. I knew exactly what I needed to do in this critical moment. I needed to feed their enormous egos until they were completely blinded by their own hubris. "Thank you so much for that beautiful announcement, Chloe," I said, clearly making sure my voice radiated total sincerity and deep affection. I raised my crystal glass high in the air, ensuring the entire room was hanging on my every single word. "I want to propose a special toast tonight. To Chloe, whose unique creative spirit is truly something to behold. And to Julian, a man whose undeniable financial genius has successfully guided us to this very moment. I am so incredibly lucky to have you both managing my future. Please, everyone, drink the absolute finest champagne we have tonight. Celebrate this amazing, powerful family." The room cheered loudly once again, completely buying into the beautiful illusion. Julian leaned in and kissed my cheek affectionately, completely intoxicated by the public validation and the perceived security of my wealth. Chloe preened for the cameras, striking practiced poses for her social media followers. I watched them eagerly drink the expensive vintage champagne, knowing with absolute mathematical certainty that every single drop was being actively charged to a completely doomed fraudulent bank account. As the decadent multi-course dinner was finally served by a small army of waiters, the guests began to mingle and move around the massive dining room. I noticed Julian giving a highly secretive, urgent look to his older brother Darius. The two men casually separated from the main crowd, walking slowly toward a secluded balcony area that overlooked the busy city streets below. They thought they were being incredibly discreet and clever. They had absolutely no idea that I had already anticipated this exact type of secretive behavior. Earlier that evening, while I was helping Julian adjust his expensive velvet jacket in our hotel suite, I had carefully slipped a tiny, highly advanced audio recording device directly into his breast pocket. The device was perfectly disguised as a standard high-end luxury pen. It was currently transmitting a crystal-clear live audio feed directly to a microscopic earpiece hidden securely beneath my styled hair. I politely excused myself from a tedious conversation with one of Brenda's church friends and walked quietly toward the ladies' restroom. I slipped inside a private marble-lined stall, locked the heavy wooden door securely behind me, and pressed my finger gently against my hidden earpiece to amplify the audio volume. Julian's voice came through the tiny speaker with absolute terrifying clarity. The ambient noise of the balcony traffic was completely drowned out by his harsh, predatory tone. "I am telling you, bro, she is an absolute goldmine," Julian said to Darius, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated greed and malice. "She actually believes all this romantic garbage. She ate up the toast completely. She did not even question Chloe making up that ridiculous job title in front of everyone. She is totally compliant and completely clueless. Darius chuckled darkly. You really secured the massive bag, man. But what about your other serious issues? What about the dangerous syndicate debt? Are you sure you can access her corporate capital in time before they come collecting? Those guys are not going to wait around forever, and they are threatening my real estate firm now, too. Julian let out a cold, highly dismissive laugh. Relax, Darius. I have it entirely under control. I had her sign that asset consolidation document at my office last week. She thinks it is just a standard portfolio merger, but it legally binds her corporate equity directly to my wealth management accounts. As soon as the ink dries on the marriage certificate tomorrow afternoon, I have full executive authorization. I am transferring $5 million to offshore accounts immediately to completely cover my tracks and pay off the syndicate. After that, we are systematically liquidating her company shares for maximum personal profit. A heavy, sickening wave of absolute disgust washed over my entire body. I leaned against the cold marble wall of the restroom stall, listening to the man I once loved casually plot the total ruthless destruction of my entire life work. He was not just planning to steal enough money to clear his dangerous underground debts. He was planning to completely liquidate my company. He wanted to strip me of everything I had built from the ground up, leaving me with absolutely nothing but a broken heart and a massive legal nightmare. And what about the girl? Darius asked, his voice sounding slightly nervous and hesitant. What are you going to do with Simone once you drain the accounts completely? You cannot just stay married to her if you successfully steal her company. I am absolutely not staying married to her, Julian replied coldly, confirming the exact horrifying truth I had already expected. I am going to file for a quiet, uncontested divorce in exactly 6 months. I will claim irreconcilable differences and pretend the startup stress ruined our relationship. By the time her lawyers figure out what actually happened to her corporate shares, the money will be completely untraceable in the Cayman Islands. She will be totally ruined, and I will be retiring on a private beach. Now come on, let us get back inside before she notices we are gone. We have to play the loving family for one more night. The audio feed went completely silent as the two men walked back into the noisy, crowded dining room. I stood in the restroom for a long time, letting the sheer, unfiltered malice of his words sink deeply into my bones. The final lingering shred of hesitation or guilt I might have felt about destroying him was instantly, permanently eradicated. Julian Sterling was not a man. He was a dangerous, calculating parasite, and I was going to gladly exterminate his entire fraudulent existence. I checked my makeup in the mirror, ensuring my expression was perfectly composed and appropriately radiant. I walked out of the restroom and smoothly rejoined the lavish party. I found Julian holding court near the main bar, laughing loudly with his fraternity brothers. I walked up behind him and wrapped my arms affectionately around his waist, resting my head gently against his shoulder. He turned and smiled at me, playing the role of the devoted groom flawlessly. Just as I was about to compliment his beautiful toast, I noticed the general manager of the exclusive dining club walking rapidly toward us. The manager looked incredibly stressed, his face pale and his posture rigidly anxious. He completely bypassed Julian and stepped directly in front of me, officially recognizing me as the true financial power in the room, thanks to the recent national news broadcast. Miss Caldwell, the manager, whispered urgently, leaning in close so the surrounding wealthy guests could not hear his words. I am so incredibly sorry to interrupt your beautiful evening. However, we have a highly urgent financial situation that requires your immediate attention tonight. I looked at Julian, who suddenly looked very nervous and slightly confused. What is the problem? I asked the manager calmly, keeping my voice perfectly level. The manager swallowed hard, glancing nervously at Julian, before looking respectfully back at me. The payment method Mr. Sterling provided for tonight's event has just been returned by the processing bank. The transaction was completely denied. The credit card he used to secure the rehearsal dinner has bounced entirely. We require immediate payment for the catering, the venue rental, and the staff gratuity, or we will be forced to shut down the bar and end the event right now. Julian's face drained of all color instantly. The arrogant, boastful man who had just stood on a balcony plotting to steal $5 million was suddenly terrified of a simple catering bill. He patted his tailored jacket pockets frantically, desperately looking for another credit card he knew he did not have. "Simone, baby!" Julian stammered, his voice cracking with sudden, overwhelming panic. "It must be a strict fraud alert on my primary account. The bank probably flagged the large transaction because of the wedding. Can you just cover this really quickly? I will transfer the funds back to you first thing tomorrow morning. I promise you." I looked at his desperate, sweating face. I looked at the manager, who was waiting anxiously for my response. I could have easily pulled out my black corporate card and paid the bill right there. I could have saved him the immense public embarrassment. But I was officially done saving Julian Sterling. I smiled warmly at the venue manager, my voice projecting absolute unbothered confidence. "Do not worry about a single thing tonight," I told the manager smoothly, making absolutely sure to speak loud enough for Julian to hear every single word clearly. "Let the guests enjoy the rest of the beautiful evening. Keep the expensive champagne flowing freely. Tomorrow at the wedding, Julian will personally pay for absolutely everything, with interest." The manager nodded, deeply relieved by my wealthy assurance, and walked away to instruct the catering staff. Julian let out a massive sigh of relief, completely unaware of the lethal double meaning behind my words. He pulled me into a tight hug, kissing the top of my head. "Thank you, baby," Julian whispered in my ear. "You are an absolute lifesaver. I owe you everything." I hugged him back, feeling the hard shape of the recording pen hidden safely inside his pocket. "Yes, Julian," I thought to myself, my smile turning completely ruthless in the shadows. "You owe me absolutely everything, and tomorrow I am coming to collect." The sun rose over Atlanta, casting a warm golden glow across the luxury bridal suite of the historic estate Brenda had confidently booked using my seemingly unlimited funds. The morning of my highly anticipated wedding had finally arrived. I sat perfectly still in a plush velvet chair, while a massive team of expensive hair and makeup artists buzzed anxiously around me. The suite was undeniably massive, but it felt incredibly crowded and suffocating because Brenda and Chloe had completely taken over the entire space. They treated the bridal suite exactly like it was their own personal kingdom, barking harsh, demanding orders at the hired service staff and loudly complaining about the temperature of their complimentary mimosas. I silently watched their reflection in the ornate vanity mirror, letting their insufferable arrogance wash over me like water off a stone. Brenda walked aggressively up behind my chair, box, containing a gaudy, outdated pearl necklace. She reached out without asking permission and aggressively unclasped the simple, elegant gold chain I was currently wearing around my neck. "Put this on instead," Brenda commanded sharply, dropping the heavy, ostentatious pearls onto my bare collarbone. "Your personal jewelry is far too plain and cheap for the elite aesthetic we are trying to project today. You need to understand something very important right now, Simone. When you walk down that massive aisle in a few short hours, you leave your entire pathetic past behind you. Your warehouse days, your cheap clothes, your lower-class mindset, all of it stays firmly outside those church doors. Once you say those vows, you belong to the Sterlings now. You represent our legacy, and you will look the part whether you like it or not." I looked directly at Brenda through the reflection of the large vanity mirror. I did not flinch. I did not argue with her ridiculous demands. I simply allowed the terrified makeup artist to continue applying foundation to my face in total silence. I was not a nervous, blushing bride getting ready for the happiest day of her life. I was a commanding general calmly preparing for absolute unmitigated war. Every single trace of human emotion had been meticulously drained from my entire body. My face was a highly guarded mask of cold, unyielding stone. While Brenda continued to loudly lecture the principal hairstylist about achieving the perfect sophisticated curl, I smoothly reached for my mobile phone resting quietly on the vanity counter. I securely opened my highly encrypted messaging application and found my active thread with Zoe. She was already physically stationed at the Grand Cathedral, coordinating directly with the elite private security team and the federal contacts we had quietly tipped off earlier that week. I rapidly typed out a brief three-word message using only my thumb. "Lock the gates." Zoe replied less than a minute later. "The perimeter is fully secured. The financial trap is officially loaded. See you at the altar." I slid the phone away, placing it face down on the marble counter. The financial snare was perfectly in place. In exactly 2 hours, Julian would legally default on the massive $2.5 million syndicate debt that I now personally owned. His encrypted offshore wire transfers were already permanently blocked by my development team. His real estate firm was deeply compromised by our shadow audit, and his secret mistress had willingly provided the exact audio evidence needed to bury him in federal court for decades. I just needed to walk down that long church aisle and let him publicly claim his imaginary prize in front of everyone he wanted to impress. Chloe suddenly strutted over to my quiet corner of the room. She was wearing a completely inappropriate, highly revealing bridesmaid dress that she clearly chose to desperately upstage me. She was holding a steaming cup of dark coffee in one hand and her expensive smartphone in the other, already live streaming the morning preparations to her fake influencer audience. She pointed the camera directly at my face, offering a sickeningly sweet, fabricated smile to her viewers. "Look at our beautiful bride today," Chloe cooed loudly to her followers, ensuring her voice carried across the suite. "We are working so incredibly hard to make sure she looks acceptable for my wealthy brother. It is a massive transformation project, guys, but we are finally turning this rough stone into a polished gem." As she turned her body to capture the long, flowing white veil hanging delicately on a velvet dress form near my chair, Chloe deliberately stumbled forward. She forcefully lurched her body, pretending her expensive designer stiletto had caught aggressively on the thick carpet. She reached out her hands to allegedly steady herself, her sharp manicured fingers gripping tightly onto the delicate French lace of my bridal veil. With a violent, forceful, and entirely intentional jerk, she ripped the fragile white fabric straight down the middle. The loud, devastating tearing sound caused absolutely everyone in the bridal suite to freeze in sheer panic. "Oops," Chloe laughed loudly, not sounding the least bit apologetic for the massive destruction she just caused. "I am so incredibly clumsy this morning. I guess that cheap discount lace was a lot more fragile than it looked. Do not worry too much, Simone. We can probably just pin it back together with some cheap safety pins. Nobody will even notice the terrible difference from the very back of the dark church." Brenda sighed dramatically, shaking her head with profound disappointment. "This is exactly why I told you to let me handle the entire wardrobe budget, Simone. Cheap, low-quality materials always fall apart under any real pressure. We will just have the expensive photographer shoot you exclusively from the waist up to hide the damage." The hired makeup artists and hairstylists stood in stunned, horrifying silence, fully expecting me to burst into hysterical, uncontrollable tears over my completely ruined wedding attire. They did not understand the sinister dynamic operating in the room. Chloe had intentionally destroyed my veil to humiliate me one final time before I officially joined their toxic family. She deeply wanted me to walk down the aisle looking broken, damaged, and entirely inferior to her. I stood up slowly from the velvet vanity chair. I did not blink. I did not shed a single solitary tear. I looked down at the shredded white lace hanging sadly from the dress form, and then I looked directly into Chloe's fake smiling face. "You are absolutely right, Chloe," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. "Cheap materials really do fall apart entirely under pressure. It is a very good thing I always carry a highly reliable backup plan." I walked confidently across the massive bridal suite toward the heavy mahogany doors of the master closet. I pulled a small, solid brass key from my purse and smoothly unlocked the door. I reached deep inside the dark space and pulled out a thick, completely opaque garment bag. I unzipped the heavy bag in one swift motion and let the dark protective fabric fall entirely to the floor. A collective genuine gasp echoed loudly through the room. Even Brenda completely lost her practiced composure, her eyes widening in absolute unadulterated shock. Hanging beautifully before them was a stunning custom-made haute couture bridal gown. It was a flawless, breathtaking masterpiece of hand-stitched pure silk imported French lace and thousands of tiny glittering Swarovski crystals that caught the light brilliantly. It featured a dramatic sweeping train and a matching cathedral-length veil that shimmered beautifully in the morning sunlight. It was not a cheap, off-the-rack dress from a discount store. It was a $50,000 custom creation that I had purchased entirely with my own money, directly from a highly exclusive private designer in Paris. I pulled the magnificent gown from the closet and held it up proudly. The sheer weight and undeniable luxury of the garment commanded total absolute silence in the room. Where on earth did you get that dress? Brenda demanded, her voice tight with a sudden confusing mixture of extreme jealousy and profound confusion. Julian absolutely did not authorize a massive purchase like that. We definitely did not pay for that extravagant dress. I smiled a cold, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. No, Brenda, you certainly did not. I bought it myself. I explicitly told you I wanted to properly represent Black excellence today. I decided to elevate my own aesthetic without your help. I turned to the stunned makeup artists, who were still staring with their mouths open. Please help me get into my dress now. We have a highly anticipated wedding to attend. Chloe and Brenda stood completely frozen in the corner of the suite, watching in seething, furious silence as I was expertly laced into the $50,000 gown. They could not comprehend how a simple warehouse worker could possibly afford such an extravagant garment without begging Julian for money. The very first seeds of genuine doubt were finally beginning to plant themselves deeply in their greedy minds, but they were far too arrogant and blinded by their own superiority to see the massive tidal wave rapidly approaching the shore. Once I was fully dressed and perfectly styled, I looked like an absolute untouchable queen. The heavy silk hugged my curves flawlessly, and the crystal-encrusted veil framed my face with elegant precision. I dismissed the hair and makeup team, telling them I needed a few moments of absolute privacy before the long limousine ride to the cathedral. Brenda and Chloe huffed loudly, but immediately exited the suite, eager to go secure their front row seats, and complain to their wealthy friends about my sudden, unacceptable display of independence. The heavy suite doors clicked firmly shut, leaving me completely alone in the quiet room. I reached up and carefully adjusted the microscopic earpiece hidden safely beneath my thick, styled curls. I tapped the small device twice, actively engaging the live audio feed, transmitting directly from the luxury pen. I had slipped into Julian velvet jacket the night before. The audio connected instantly. The loud background noise of clinking glasses and boisterous, arrogant male laughter filled my ear. Julian was currently in the groomsmen's suite at the church holding court with his brother Darius and his elite fraternity friends. Pour me another glass of that 20-year-old Scotchman, Julian voice boomed clearly over the hidden microphone. I need to properly celebrate my genius before I go out there and put on the golden handcuffs. I heard the distinct sound of liquid pouring into a heavy crystal tumbler, followed by Darius laughing deeply. You are an absolute wild man, Julian, Darius said, his voice laced with awe. I still cannot believe you actually pulled this off. You are really going to stand up there and marry this clueless girl just to securely acquire her entire corporate portfolio. Julian let out a loud, arrogant scoff that echoed through the earpiece. He tapped his glass against something hard, likely proposing a boastful toast to his wealthy friends. Listen to me very closely, gentlemen. Julian announced, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated predatory greed. I want you all to raise your glasses high right now. This is not a wedding, boys. It is a highly aggressive corporate acquisition. The room erupted into loud supportive cheers and disgusting masculine laughter. As soon as the ink dries on that marriage certificate today, Julian continued, completely bragging on the hot microphone for everyone in his suite to hear. I am transferring $5 million straight to the Cayman Islands. My wealth management firm is totally saved, my dangerous syndicate debts are instantly erased, and I am officially a multimillionaire. We are actively liquidating her company shares by the end of the month, and I am dropping her like a bad habit before the holidays even start. To the greatest financial heist in Atlanta history. To the heist, the men cheered in unison, their crystal glasses clinking loudly against one another. I stood completely alone in the center of the quiet bridal suite, wearing my $50,000 gown, listening to the man I once loved eagerly celebrate my planned destruction. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel an ounce of sorrow or heartbreak. I felt an incredible, powerful surge of absolute, unyielding adrenaline. He truly thought he was the ultimate predator. He believed he had successfully hunted the perfect, compliant prey. I reached up and tapped my earpiece intentionally, leaving the live audio feed running, as I turned slowly toward the heavy suite doors. It was finally time to go to the church. It was time to walk down the aisle and let Julian Sterling proudly spring the very trap that would permanently end his miserable, fraudulent life. I opened the heavy doors and stepped out into the hallway, fully prepared to execute the most brutal, devastating financial slaughter this city had ever seen. I stepped out of the bridal suite and walked down the carpeted hallway of the historic estate. My mind was sharper than it had ever been. The limousine ride to the Grand Cathedral was a masterclass in silent preparation. I sat in the spacious back seat, feeling the heavy silk of my custom Parisian gown cascading around my legs. I focused entirely on my breathing, regulating my heart rate, and reviewing the precise legal and financial maneuvers Zoe and I had locked into place. When the sleek vehicle glided to a stop in front of the massive stone cathedral, Brenda greed was immediately apparent. She had spared absolutely no expense using the fraudulent credit lines she believed I would blindly pay for later. The towering cathedral doors were flanked by massive overflowing arrangements of imported white roses and rare orchids. A red carpet spilled down the stone steps, welcoming the elite of Atlanta high society. Black luxury SUVs lined the entire city block. As I stepped out of the limousine, a team of professional wedding coordinators rushed forward to meticulously arrange my sweeping crystal-encrusted train. I ignored their energy. I stood perfectly tall, my shoulders pulled back, projecting the terrifying, undeniable aura of a woman who completely owned the ground she walked on. Inside the Grand Cathedral, the atmosphere was thick with overwhelming arrogance and performative wealth. Hundreds of elite guests, wealthy corporate magnates, and high society socialites filled the polished wooden pews to absolute maximum capacity. They were all dressed in their finest designer attire, eagerly waiting to witness the glorious expansion of the fake Sterling family empire. A massive, soaring gospel choir stood proudly in the choir loft, their powerful voices filling the cavernous space with a breathtaking, soul-stirring melody. It was a spectacular theatrical production designed solely to feed their insatiable egos. Standing at the very front of the altar looking like the absolute pinnacle of manufactured success was Julian. He wore a pristine custom-tailored white tuxedo jacket with sharp black lapels. He stood with his chest puffed out proudly, his hands clasped neatly in front of him, projecting the flawless image of a wealthy, devoted groom waiting for his beloved bride. In the front row, Brenda and Chloe sat together like royalty, wearing ostentatious designer gowns and sporting sickeningly sweet fabricated smiles for the roaming professional photographers. They were all eagerly waiting for the golden goose to finally walk into their carefully laid trap. The massive oak doors at the back of the cathedral swung open. The powerful gospel choir immediately transitioned into a soaring, triumphant bridal march. The congregation rose smoothly to their feet, turning their heads in unison to look at the back of the church. I stepped forward into the warm, golden light streaming through the giant stained glass windows. A collective, highly audible gasp rippled rapidly through the massive crowd of elite guests. I was not wearing the cheap, ruined dress Chloe had intentionally destroyed. I was wearing $50,000 of pure haute couture. I walked down the long, carpeted aisle completely alone. I had no father to give me away, and I did not need one. I was a self-made, vastly powerful chief executive officer marching directly toward a hostile corporate takeover of my own brilliant design. With every single step I took, the heavy, luxurious silk of my gown rustled softly, commanding absolute respect from every wealthy patron in the room. I kept my chin held incredibly high, my face a mask of serene, untouchable perfection. As I slowly approached the ornate altar, I locked eyes directly with Julian. He gave me a winning, fiercely predatory smile. It was the exact same charming, deceitful smile he had used to manipulate me for 2 entire years. His eyes eagerly raked over my incredibly expensive gown, calculating the massive wealth it represented. He thought he was watching a naive, compliant warehouse worker marching obediently into his financial slaughterhouse. I finally reached the altar and stepped up to stand directly across from Julian. He reached out and gently took both of my hands in his, squeezing them with fake manufactured affection. "You look absolutely breathtaking," Simone Julian whispered softly, leaning in close so only I could hear his lying voice. "I am the luckiest man in the world today." I smiled warmly back at him, ruthlessly suppressing the intense burning desire to pull my hands away from his toxic grip. "Thank you, Julian," I replied, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any real emotion. "You are definitely going to get exactly what you deserve today." The distinguished pastor, a prominent leader in the Atlanta megachurch community, stepped forward to begin the ceremony. He spread his arms wide, welcoming the massive congregation with a booming theatrical voice. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and these esteemed witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony," the pastor began. The tension in the grand cathedral was absolutely palpable. The air felt thick and heavy with the massive unspoken lies heavily suffocating the room. The pastor continued his highly traditional sermon. He spoke passionately about the profound importance of absolute trust, unwavering financial unity, and building a powerful family legacy that would last for generations. Every single word he spoke was drenched in sick, bitter irony. He preached about honesty while standing directly in front of a man who was actively planning to steal $5 million from my corporate accounts and offshore it to the Cayman Islands. He preached about legacy while Brenda and Chloe sat just feet away, having actively plotted to humiliate and destroy me from the very beginning. While the pastor continued his dramatic speech about mutual respect and marital devotion, I shifted my gaze to the front row on the left side of the aisle. Sitting perfectly upright, wearing a razor-sharp tailored black suit, was my best friend and corporate attorney, Zoe. She looked incredibly fierce and intensely focused. Resting securely on her lap was a thick black leather briefcase. Inside that briefcase was the absolute undeniable proof of Julian's massive financial crimes, his fraudulent syndicate debt, and the binding legal documents that officially transferred all his assets to my shadow holding company. Zoe caught my eye and gave me a single, barely perceptible nod. The legal weapon was fully loaded and ready to deploy. The gates were officially locked. There was absolutely no way out for the Sterling family now. I looked back at Julian. He was staring at the pastor, nodding solemnly at the profound words about commitment and loyalty. I was playing his role flawlessly, projecting the image of a deeply devoted, honorable man, ready to lead his new family to greatness. He was completely oblivious to the microscopic earpiece still securely hidden beneath my styled hair, or the fact that I had just spent the morning listening to him explicitly brag about abandoning me and liquidating my entire life work. The ceremony moved rapidly toward its defining moment. The massive cathedral grew incredibly quiet as the pastor lowered his hands and looked out at the hundreds of elite guests filling the wooden pews. This was the traditional ceremonial moment that every single wedding required, a moment that usually passed in complete respectful silence. If anyone present here today knows any just cause or valid reason why these two individuals should not be legally joined together in holy matrimony, the pastor announced, his booming voice echoing loudly off the high vaulted ceilings of the historic church. "Speak now or forever hold your peace." A heavy, expectant silence instantly fell over the massive room. Julian continued to smile, his arrogant, predatory smile, gently rubbing his thumb across the back of my hand. Brenda adjusted her posture in the front row, looking incredibly smug and victorious. Chloe held her phone ready, waiting to record the exact moment her brother secured access to my $300 million fortune. They all fully expected the silence to hold. They expected the pastor to smoothly continue to the exchange of the marital rings. They were all completely, devastatingly wrong. I deliberately pulled my hands out of Julian's tight, possessive grip. His winning smile faltered slightly, a brief flash of genuine confusion crossing his handsome face as he looked down at my retreating hands. I took one smooth, highly calculated step backward, creating a distinct, visible physical distance between myself and the man who wanted to destroy me. I reached my right hand directly into the center of my beautiful, cascading bridal bouquet of imported white orchids. Hidden perfectly among the delicate flower stems was a small black wireless remote control connected directly to the cathedral's massive audiovisual system. I gripped the remote firmly in my palm. I looked Julian straight in his arrogant, lying eyes. I raised my left hand, calmly reached out and grabbed the microphone directly from the stunned pastor hand. I brought the microphone to my lips, my voice echoing powerfully across the absolute dead silence of the massive crowded cathedral. I have a few reasons. I lowered the microphone slightly, letting the heavy weight of my statement hang over the magnificent altar. A collective sharp gasp echoed through the cavernous space of the grand cathedral. Hundreds of wealthy guests shifted uncomfortably in their polished wooden pews. Julian's charming smile vanished, completely replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. His eyes darted wildly around the altar, searching for a logical explanation. Brenda stood up abruptly in the front row, her expensive designer hat trembling as she clutched her pearl necklace tightly. Chloe dropped her phone into her lap, entirely forgetting to record her fake influencer content. The heavy air inside the historic building was thick with palpable tension and mounting dread. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something catastrophic. Julian let out a nervous, hollow laugh, trying desperately to salvage his perfectly constructed public image. He told me I was making a very strange joke and whispered forcefully while reaching his hand out to grab my arm. He begged me to give the pastor back the microphone before I embarrassed our prominent family. I effortlessly stepped entirely out of his reach. I did not break eye contact with him for a single second. I raised my right hand, gripping the small black remote control hidden perfectly inside my cascading bouquet of white orchids. I pressed the central button on the remote with absolute clinical precision. High above the choir loft, two massive digital projectors instantly flickered to life. These expensive projectors were originally rented by Brenda to display a romantic, highly fabricated photo montage of our relationship during the ceremony. Instead, the enormous white screens flanking the majestic altar lit up with crystal-clear, high-definition financial documents. The very first image to appear was a massive blown-up screenshot of my joint banking application. The bright green numbers were impossible to miss. It clearly displayed the exact moment Julian had ruthlessly drained $80,000 from my savings. Right beside the bank statement was the itemized receipt from a luxury car dealership and an invoice for a diamond-encrusted Cartier watch. The crowd of elite socialites erupted into loud, furious whispers. They could all clearly read the dates and the exact dollar amounts. Julian demanded to know what this was, his voice cracking with sudden, terrifying panic. He ordered me to turn the screens off right now. I pressed the button again. The screen instantly transitioned to a much more sinister document. It was the highly classified property deed to my late grandmother, modest childhood home. Right next to it was the finalized loan agreement for the massive second mortgage Julian had secretly taken out to cover his failing margin calls. The forged signature was enlarged and highlighted in bright red ink for the entire congregation to see clearly. The reaction from the audience was instantaneous and completely visceral. Wealthy business magnates pointed at the screen, shaking their heads in absolute disgust. Respected church elders gasped, covering their mouths in sheer horror. Stealing from a partner was bad enough, but actively forging documents to steal a deceased grandmother family home was an unforgivable sin in this prestigious community. Brenda let out a loud, hysterical shriek from the front row. She frantically waved her arms in the air like a madwoman, telling everyone it was just a glitch. She screamed that the system was hacked and demanded somebody cut the power to those screens immediately. I ignored her pathetic screaming entirely. I pressed the remote control for the third time. The screen shifted to display a highly detailed digital map showing a complex web of encrypted wire transfers. Bright red arrows pointed directly from my corporate startup accounts to an untraceable offshore banking account located in the Cayman Islands. I spoke clearly and powerfully into the microphone, telling Julian he thought I was just a naive, uneducated warehouse worker. I told him he thought he could easily manipulate me, drain my financial accounts, and leave me completely ruined. I told him he severely underestimated exactly who he was dealing with today. Julian's face was completely covered in thick, nervous sweat. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his custom-tailored white tuxedo jacket. He begged me to handle this privately, whispering that I was ruining his reputation. I replied coldly that his reputation was always a complete fabricated illusion, and I was not finished yet. I signaled Zoe in the front row. She quickly tapped a single key on her laptop. The soaring acoustics of the Grand Cathedral were suddenly filled with crisp, crystal-clear audio. It was the exact recording I had captured using the bugged luxury pen during the rehearsal dinner the night before. Julian's harsh, predatory voice echoed loudly off the stained glass windows for every single guest to hear. The recording played, highlighting his malicious greed as he called me an absolute goldmine. His recorded voice laughed about how I believed all his romantic garbage and how I was totally compliant and completely clueless. The entire congregation gasped in unison. Julian's older brother, Darius, shrank down in his front row seat, desperately trying to hide his face from the furious glares of his own wealthy colleagues. The audio continued playing relentlessly. "Listen to me very closely, gentlemen," Julian's recorded voice announced, dripping with pure evil intent. "This is not a wedding, boys, it is an acquisition. As soon as the ink dries on that marriage certificate today, I am transferring $5 million to offshore accounts. We are systematically liquidating her company shares for maximum personal profit. I am going to file for a quiet, uncontested divorce in exactly 6 months. She will be totally ruined and I will be retiring on a private beach." The silence that followed the recording was incredibly heavy and deeply suffocating. The elite members of Atlanta high society were staring at Julian with pure, unadulterated contempt. I was completely exposed as a ruthless financial predator, attempting to execute a massive federal crime right in front of their eyes. But I was not done completely destroying him yet. The audio feed shifted seamlessly to a new recording. A soft, terrified female voice filled the cathedral. It was Maya Jenkins, the junior analyst Julian had been secretly sleeping with and using for her credit profile. Her tearful voice echoed through the speakers, explaining how he promised he was making all the monthly payments. She revealed how he told her he was going to pretend to be the perfect loving fiancé just to transfer $5 million of my corporate capital the second the marriage certificate became legally binding. She exposed his plan to leave me standing alone at the altar so he could meet her at the private airport and fly away together using company money. The crowd erupted into total absolute chaos. Prominent judges shook their heads in disbelief. Politicians whispered frantically to their aides. Brenda collapsed back into her wooden pew, sobbing hysterically into her hands. Her perfect, flawless image was completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Chloe covered her face, trying desperately to hide from the dozens of smartphone cameras recording her family total disgrace. Julian completely lost his mind. His eyes were wild and completely bloodshot. He let out a furious, animalistic roar and lunged violently forward across the altar, trying to aggressively snatch the microphone directly out of my hand. He wanted to silence me by physical force. He never made it past the first step. Zoe instantly sprang up from the front row. She moved with lightning-fast precision. 2 imposing private security guards dressed in tactical black suits stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains flanking the altar. They moved efficiently, positioning their large, muscular bodies directly between me and Julian. One of the guards placed his hand on Julian's chest, pushing the frantic groom backward. The security guard ordered Julian to stay exactly where he was, his voice a deep, rumbling threat. He warned him not to take another step toward me. Julian stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the hem of his expensive tuxedo trousers. He was breathing heavily, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage and profound desperation. He looked at me, surrounded by my security detail, and finally realized he had lost total control of the narrative. He screamed hysterically, his voice echoing across the chaotic cathedral, telling me I could not do this to him. He called me absolutely crazy and said I thought I was incredibly smart, but I was still just a warehouse worker. He reminded me we signed the asset consolidation agreement yesterday and claimed he had the fully executed legal document right now. He yelled that he owned half my company and would liquidate every single share to destroy my life. The utter silence that blanketed the cathedral was absolute perfection. Every single pair of eyes in the historic building shifted rapidly back and forth between us. They were all completely mesmerized by the magnificent destruction of a prominent wealth manager. Julian's entire body was visibly shaking. The thick veins in his neck were pulsing aggressively against the tight collar of his crisp white shirt. He desperately reached his shaking hand inside his tuxedo jacket and ripped the folded consolidation contract from his inner pocket. He held the expensive parchment paper high in the air, as if it were an impenetrable shield capable of protecting his fabricated kingdom from my fiery wrath. His breathing was completely erratic. He frantically waved the pages at the horrified audience, demanding they validate his delusional ownership over my vast empire. He yelled that the legal document proved he was officially the co-owner of Oratech and held full executive authority over my financial assets. He firmly believed this singular piece of paper would magically save him from the absolute destruction raining down upon his heavy head. He thought corporate law was his ultimate weapon against my meticulously planned vengeance today. I calmly stared at the desperately flailing man. He was clinging entirely to a fraudulent piece of paper that was fundamentally worthless. He truly believed he had secured an ultimate victory. He did not know he was waving his own legal death warrant in front of everyone. I stood perfectly still, watching him scream like a trapped, desperate rat. I handed my white orchid bouquet to Zoe, who was standing confidently at my side, holding her thick black leather briefcase. I looked at Julian, allowing a slow, chilling, predatory smile to completely overtake my face. I was the ultimate apex predator, calmly looking directly at my pathetic cornered prey. I raised the microphone back to my lips, ensuring the entire captivated audience could hear the final devastating blow I was about to deliver. I asked him a very simple question. Did you read the fine print, Julian? Julian stared blankly at the expensive parchment paper, trembling violently in his hands. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, frantically scanned the bottom of the page. He was desperately searching for the loophole he believed would save him, looking at the stylized, illegible cursive he had completely ignored just days ago in his arrogant rush to secure my fortune. He found nothing but his own undeniable signature legally binding him to his absolute ruin. I did not give him a single second to breathe. I pressed the microphone closer to my mouth, ensuring my voice resonated with perfect crystalline clarity throughout the cavernous cathedral. The document you signed wasn't a merger of our personal assets, Julian. I announced, my words echoing like thunder over the horrified congregation. You did not merge your portfolio with Simone Caldwell. You signed your remaining equity, your wealth management firm, and your personal assets over to Lumina Holdings Limited Liability Company. I paused, letting the heavy silence of the church amplify the sheer terror radiating from the altar. That is my private shadow corporation. I continued smoothly, staring directly into his panicked eyes. And you signed your entire life over to it as direct collateral for the $2.5 million syndicate debt you owe. Debt that I quietly bought out in cash last week. I am your sole creditor, Julian. I own your firm. I own your accounts. I own your massive illicit debts. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant, untouchable financial executive had been reduced to a gasping, terrified shell. And because you failed to wire the funds to your hidden offshore account in the Cayman Islands this morning. I delivered the final devastating blow with a cold, calculated smile. You officially defaulted at midnight. Everything you have is legally mine. The heavy parchment paper slipped from his sweaty fingers, fluttering uselessly to the cold marble floor. Julian's knees instantly buckled. He collapsed onto the altar, his pristine white tuxedo wrinkling as he fell. He gasped for air, his chest heaving, as the crushing, inescapable reality of his situation finally shattered his mind. He had tried to steal my empire, and in doing so, he had eagerly handed me the keys to his total destruction. The absolute chaos that erupted next was immediate and highly systematic. The trap was springing shut on every single member of the Sterling family simultaneously. A sharp, aggressive buzzing sound pierced the heavy tension near the front row. Chloe's designer clutch vibrated violently, the sound echoing loudly in the quiet church. She scrambled to open it, pulling out her expensive smartphone. Her screen was completely illuminated by a rapid, unending stream of urgent notifications. I watched her face drain of all color as she read the alerts. Zoe had executed the secondary phase of our plan perfectly. The 3 high-limit corporate credit cards Chloe had fraudulently opened, using my company's name, were officially frozen. Furthermore, Zoe had triggered an automated federal fraud alert flagging Chloe's identity directly to the authorities for identity theft and massive corporate wire fraud. The $90,000 she had spent on designer bags and diamond jewelry to impress her fake influencer friends was now a massive federal crime tied entirely to her personal social security number. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She dropped the phone as if it had physically burned her. The device clattered against the wooden pew, the screen glaring with the stark red text of federal banking alerts. She grabbed her hair, sobbing uncontrollably, her fabricated social media empire completely obliterated by the harsh reality of federal prison time. Across the aisle, the devastating shockwave hit Darius next. Julian's older brother stood up abruptly, his customized suit pulling tight across his chest. He looked wildly at Julian, who was still hyperventilating on the marble floor, and then stared directly at Zoe, who sat calmly in the front row, with her black leather briefcase resting on her lap. Darius was a real estate developer, and he knew exactly how illicit money moved. He suddenly realized the terrifying implications of the offshore wire transfers displayed on the massive projectors behind me. His boutique real estate firm had been heavily implicated in Julian's shell game. He had actively helped Julian hide the syndicate debt, and the shadow audit Zoe had conducted undoubtedly contained the digital footprint linking his business directly to Julian's money laundering scheme. Darius turned a sickly shade of gray. He looked down at his wife Vanessa, who was already openly weeping into her hands. Their exclusive country club memberships and elite societal standing were entirely gone. They were going to lose everything they owned to federal asset forfeiture. The absolute destruction of the Sterling family facade was magnificent to witness. Brenda, completely unhinged by the rapid collapse of her carefully curated world, sprang from her seat. The imposing matriarch lost every single ounce of her polished high society composure. She frantically scrambled down the aisle, desperately reaching out to the elite guests sitting in the polished wooden pews. She targeted the most powerful people in the room, first desperate to salvage any shred of her ruined reputation. She lunged toward the mayor's wife and the prominent church elders. "Please, you have to understand," Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "This is a massive misunderstanding. The screens are wrong. She is lying. My son is a respectable wealth manager. We are the Sterlings." The reaction from the high society elite was visceral and immediate. These were individuals who fiercely protected their own wealth and reputations above all else. They did not offer Brenda sympathy or support. Instead, they physically recoiled from her in absolute disgust. The mayor's wife sharply pulled her expensive silk coat away, refusing to let Brenda touch her. Business magnates stood up abruptly, gathering their wives and their belongings, actively stepping away from the Sterling family as if they were infected with a highly contagious disease. They whispered furiously among themselves, their faces twisted with deep contempt. They were disgusted by the fraud, horrified by the stolen grandmother's house, and completely appalled that they had been invited to a crime scene disguised as a royal wedding. They were turning their backs on Brenda forever. Her social death was instantaneous and permanent. Realizing that her elite friends had completely abandoned her, Brenda snapped. She spun around and rushed directly up the steps of the altar. She fell to her knees right in front of me. Her designer hat knocked askew, her perfectly applied makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. She lunged forward and desperately grabbed both of my hands. Her grip was painfully tight, her fingernails digging sharply into my skin. "Simone, please," Brenda begged, sobbing hysterically, completely abandoning the haughty arrogance she had worn like a crown for 2 years. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot ruin us like this. We are your family. We are supposed to represent excellence together. We elevate each other." I did not pull my hands away immediately. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the pathetic broken woman kneeling in her expensive dress. I let her feel the absolute freezing temperature of my unwavering composure. I let her look deeply into my eyes and realize that the naive, compliant girl she thought she had manipulated had never actually existed. I slowly and forcefully pried her desperate fingers off my hands, stepping back to ensure my $50,000 couture gown remained entirely untouched by her frantic grasping. "You elevate yourselves by stepping on the backs of others, Brenda," I said. my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper that cut through her hysterical sobbing. You exploit, you steal, and you destroy innocent people to fund your fake reality. But today you stepped on a landmine. Brenda collapsed completely against the cold marble floor, wailing loudly, her hands covering her face as the utter finality of my words crushed her entirely. The grand cathedral was spiraling into total inescapable pandemonium. Julian was sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically toward the side exits, clearly calculating a desperate, futile escape. Chloe was hyperventilating in the pews, surrounded by guests who were actively filming her breakdown on their smartphones. Darius was forcefully pulling a hysterical Vanessa toward the back of the church, trying to flee before the inevitable consequences arrived. The Sterling family was completely broken, highly publicly humiliated and stripped of every single asset they possessed. The ultimate predators had been expertly gutted and left to bleed out on their own extravagant stage. But I had promised them a truly unforgettable wedding, and I always deliver on my corporate promises. Suddenly, a massive echoing boom shattered the chaotic noise of the cathedral. The heavy towering oak doors at the very back of the historic church were violently thrown open, crashing loudly against the stone walls. The bright, blinding afternoon sunlight poured into the dark cathedral, but it was immediately accompanied by something far more terrifying for the Sterling family. Vivid, rapidly pulsing flashes of bright blue and harsh red lights pierced directly through the magnificent stained glass windows, casting eerie, chaotic shadows dancing violently across the high vaulted ceilings. The soaring gospel choir had long since fallen dead silent. The whispering guests instantly froze, turning their heads in unison toward the entrance. A highly coordinated team of federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers, with bold yellow lettering across their backs, marched aggressively down the center of the red carpet. They moved with absolute terrifying precision. They were flanked by uniformed local police officers, securing every single exit in the building. Their heavy boots echoed sharply against the stone floor, the sound of absolute, inescapable justice arriving to collect its due. I looked down at Julian, who was staring at the approaching federal agents with wide, completely lifeless eyes. The fake diamond necklace he had given me felt wonderfully cold against my skin. I smiled my most beautiful, radiant bridal smile, entirely ready to watch the Sterling dynasty burn straight to the ground. Julian stared blankly at the expensive parchment paper, trembling violently in his hands. His eyes, wide and completely bloodshot, frantically scanned the bottom of the final page. I was desperately searching for the hidden loophole he believed would save him. Looking at the stylized, illegible cursive signature he had completely ignored just days ago in his arrogant rush to secure my fortune. He found absolutely nothing but his own undeniable signature, legally binding him to his absolute and total ruin. I did not give him a single second to breathe. I pressed the microphone closer to my mouth, ensuring my voice resonated with perfect crystalline clarity throughout the cavernous cathedral. The document you signed was not a merger of our personal assets, Julian. I announced, my words echoing like thunder over the horrified congregation. You did not merge your portfolio with Simone Caldwell. You signed your remaining equity, your wealth management firm, and your personal assets over to Lumina Holdings Limited Liability Company. I paused deliberately, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the church amplify the sheer terror radiating from the altar. That is my private shadow corporation. I continued, smoothly staring directly into his panicked eyes. And you signed your entire life over to it as direct collateral for the $2.5 million syndicate debt you owe. Debt that I quietly bought out in pure cash last week. I am your sole creditor, Julian. I own your firm. I own your accounts. I own your massive illicit debts. And because you failed to wire the funds to your hidden offshore account in the Cayman Islands this morning, I delivered the final devastating blow. With a cold, calculated smile, you officially defaulted at midnight. Everything you have is legally mine. The heavy parchment paper slipped from his sweaty fingers, fluttering uselessly to the cold marble floor. Julian's knees instantly buckled. He collapsed onto the altar, his pristine white tuxedo wrinkling as he fell. He gasped for air, his chest heaving, as the crushing, inescapable reality of his situation finally shattered his mind. He had tried to steal my empire, and in doing so, he had eagerly handed me the keys to his total destruction. The absolute chaos that erupted next was immediate and highly systematic. The trap was springing shut on every single member of the Sterling family simultaneously. A sharp, aggressive buzzing sound pierced the heavy tension near the front row. Chloe's designer clutch vibrated violently, the sound echoing loudly in the quiet church. She scrambled to open it, pulling out her expensive smartphone. Her screen was completely illuminated by a rapid, unending stream of urgent notifications. I watched her face drain of all color as she read the alerts. Zoe had executed the secondary phase of our plan perfectly. The 3 high-limit corporate credit cards Chloe had fraudulently opened using my company name were officially frozen. Furthermore, Zoe had triggered an automated federal fraud alert, flagging Chloe's identity directly to the authorities for identity theft and massive corporate wire fraud. The $90,000 she had spent on designer bags and diamond jewelry to impress her fake influencer friends was now a massive federal crime tied entirely to her personal social security number. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She dropped the phone as if it had physically burned her, grabbing her hair and sobbing uncontrollably. Her fabricated social media empire was completely obliterated by the harsh reality of federal prison time. Across the aisle, the devastating shockwave hit Darius next. Julian's older brother stood up abruptly, his customized suit pulling tight across his chest. He realized the terrifying implications of the offshore wire transfers displayed on the massive projectors. His boutique real estate firm had been heavily implicated in Julian's shell game. He had actively helped Julian hide the syndicate debt, and the shadow audit Zoe had conducted undoubtedly contained the digital footprint linking his business directly to the money laundering scheme. Darius turned a sickly shade of gray, looking down at his wife Vanessa, who was already openly weeping. They were going to lose everything they owned to federal asset forfeiture. Brenda, completely unhinged by the rapid collapse of her carefully curated world, sprang from her seat. The imposing matriarch lost every single ounce of her polished high society composure. She frantically scrambled down the aisle, desperately reaching out to the elite guests sitting in the polished wooden pews. She targeted the most powerful people in the room, first begging for their intervention. "Please, you have to understand," Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "This is a massive misunderstanding. The screens are wrong. She is lying. My son is a respectable wealth manager. We are the Sterlings." The reaction from the high society elite was visceral and immediate. They physically recoiled from her in absolute disgust. The mayor's wife sharply pulled her expensive silk coat away, refusing to let Brenda touch her. Business magnates stood up abruptly, gathering their wives and actively stepping away from the Sterling family, as if they were infected with a highly contagious disease. They were turning their backs on Brenda forever. Realizing that her elite friends had completely abandoned her, Brenda snapped. She spun around and rushed directly up the steps of the altar, falling to her knees right in front of me. She lunged forward and desperately grabbed both of my hands. "Simone, please," Brenda begged, sobbing hysterically, completely abandoning the haughty arrogance she had worn like a crown. "We are your family. We are supposed to represent excellence together. We elevate each other." I slowly and forcefully pried her desperate fingers off my hands, stepping back to ensure my $50,000 couture gown remained entirely untouched. "You elevate yourselves by stepping on the backs of others." "Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper that cut through her hysterical sobbing. "You exploit, you steal, and you destroy innocent people to fund your fake reality. But today, you stepped on a landmine." Brenda collapsed completely against the cold marble floor, wailing loudly as the utter finality of my words crushed her entirely. Suddenly, a massive echoing boom shattered the chaotic noise of the cathedral. The heavy towering oak doors at the very back of the historic church were violently thrown open, crashing loudly against the stone walls. Bright pulsing flashes of blue and red lights pierced directly through the magnificent stained glass windows. A highly coordinated team of federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers marched aggressively down the center of the red carpet. They moved with absolute terrifying precision, flanked by uniformed local police officers, securing every single exit. The lead federal agent bypassed the stunned pastor and stepped directly onto the raised marble altar. He pulled a silver badge from his jacket and thrust it directly into Julian's face. Julian Sterling, the agent voice boomed, completely devoid of any sympathy. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." Julian lunged backward, stumbling clumsily, and crashed hard against the wooden communion table. Two heavily armed officers grabbed his arms with brutal, unrelenting efficiency, forcefully twisting his wrists behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoed through the cathedral. His pristine, custom-tailored white tuxedo jacket ripped violently at the shoulder seam as he struggled, the expensive fabric instantly ruined. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I stood completely still, looking down at him from the elevated altar. The federal agents dragged the screaming, thrashing groom straight down the long, red-carpeted aisle he had proudly marched down just minutes prior. I did not linger to watch the rest of them mourn their shattered illusions. I turned to Zoe, who was standing beside me with a triumphant, deeply satisfied smirk. I reached out and handed her my pristine bouquet of imported white orchids. We walked side by side down the center of the red carpet, moving with synchronized, unbothered grace. We bypassed the chaos entirely, stepping out of the cold stone church and into the warm Atlanta air. A sleek black chauffeured Maybach was waiting at the curb. I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, leaving the ruins of the Sterling Empire permanently in my rearview mirror. The next morning, the bright sun hit the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of my massive corner office, casting a brilliant warm light across the polished mahogany floors at Oratech. I stood looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline, wearing a razor-sharp, custom-tailored crimson power suit that radiated absolute authority. Behind my sleek executive desk, a large flat-screen television was tuned to the National Financial News Network. The breaking news banner read: "The disgrace of the Sterling Capital manager," detailing the overnight federal raid and seizure of all their assets. I picked up the remote and calmly muted the television. I walked over to my desk and took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of hot black coffee. I sat down in my luxurious leather executive chair, opening a brand new billion-dollar global expansion pitch deck resting perfectly in the center of my desk. She didn't just survive the fire, she became the inferno. I smiled, a genuine expression of pure freedom, and got back to work. Fade to black.